From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay, preventing stress on bees, why it's so important to keep these bees buzzing.
We don't have a live oyster in here.
Floodwaters aren't just killing crops, what all that water is doing to seed life in the Deep South. And could things be getting back on track when it comes to trade talks with China?
And it's impossible to predict when that will be resolved, but I think it is such an important issue. It's one that not only do we have to engage in, but should have been engaged in for decades.
AgDay, presented by the all-new Chevy Silverado, the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. The stock market soaring on Tuesday after President Trump announced on Twitter he will be meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The president tweeting, quote, had a very good telephone conversation with President Xi of China. We will be having an extended meeting next week at the G20 in Japan. Our respective teams will begin talks prior to our meeting, end quote. Now it comes after talks hit a roadblock in May, U.S. negotiators saying China backed out on commitments as talks neared an end. In response, the Trump administration increased tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods, those tariffs increasing from 10 to 25%. But now several U.S. businesses are imploring the president not to expand tariffs on the remaining $300 billion in goods from China, or at least spare those imports that are of key importance to their customers.
In economic terms, the burden of these tariffs so far, I think a strong case could be made. It falls more heavily on China. And we're actually seeing evidence. Their companies, they're losing market share. So a lot of importers in the U.S. can go elsewhere. There's a lot of elasticity of demand, if you pardon that economics phrase. Don't have to buy from China. That's one point. China seems to be slashing their prices, so they're losing money.
If we don't get an agreement, and then we have to do something. And if there's a better idea than tariffs, I'd like to hear it. I haven't heard it. But I do know that you and I agree that just chatting with them in a dialogue is not going to get them to change, because that's been proven to be unsuccessful.
U.S. Trade Representative Lighthizer making those comments during a Senate Finance Committee hearing on trade. During the session, Lighthizer answering a myriad of questions from China to TPP and current negotiations with Japan.
We're in a position thus where we're treated worse than we were before relative to our strongest competition, and that's an unacceptable situation from the United States point of view, and we are in negotiations, and I think we're making headway in that score.
Lighthizer says his team plans to meet with Japanese officials during the G20 summit later this month. He hopes to have a full agreement completed within the next few months. As for the USMCA, Lighthizer says the deal is much better than NAFTA and is urging Congress to approve it soon.
If you look at the top of the ITC number, and in their text, they said there's reason to believe we would be close to the top. Close to the top, it's 1% of GDP and 550,000 jobs. So there really never has been a trade agreement that's had this much impact, has the potential for this much impact on the economy, on workers, just right across the economy.
Is it better for American farmers under the status quo NAFTA, or better under the USMCA, the new agreement?
No, the USMCA is substantially better. There are egg and poultry improvements, there are dairy improvements, there are wheat improvements, there are SPS improvements, there are a whole bunch of additional improvements.
Lighthizer says they continue to work through concerns with members of Congress and are following the Speaker of the House process for completing the agreement. A new report out of Bloomberg says China continues to stockpile meat as African swine fever decimates the country's hog herd. Importers are buying and storing meat, mostly pork and beef, as internal inventories fall. However, the report says cold storage space is running out. Importers are likely to keep stocks at the nation's ports until the end of the year, ahead of peak consuming season. China isn't alone in its battle against African swine fever. Vietnam has now culled more than 2.5 million pigs in an effort to slow the spread of ASF. The Ag Ministry there says the outbreak has nearly reached every province in the country. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization declared the ASF outbreak a national emergency. However, the country hasn't yet, telling Reuters since the virus isn't harmful to humans and doesn't pose a threat to national security. Now, pork accounts for 3/4 of total meat consumption in Vietnam. But China is suspending pork imports from a Canadian firm. The country halting imports from Canadian firm Frigo Royale. That's after Chinese officials say they found ractopamine in shipments from the firm. China says inspections for ractopamine will be increased on all imports of pork from Canada. In April, China stopped imports from Canada's Olymel LP and Drummond exports due to labeling problems. Could more changes be coming to the rules when it comes to refining ethanol? The Wall Street Journal reports the Trump administration is considering efforts to boost ethanol further by curbing renewable fuel standard waivers. The waivers help small oil refineries avoid ethanol mandates. Now, the Journal is saying no decision has been made, but the possible action would aim to help farmers affected by China tariffs. Now, some farmers apparently told President Trump at a stop in Iowa last week that the year-round sales of E15 were not a big boost since the SREs continue to be granted. It was a rough winter for cattle in 2018. That's according to new numbers from Montana. The federal livestock indemnity program saw Montana ranchers lose 37,000 head of cattle to weather-related causes. Now, you may remember parts of Montana were blanketed in 20 to 30 inches of snow for weeks. The Billings Gazette reporting LIP paid more than $11 million to Montana producers. FSA says the 2018 payout was more than 4 times the amount paid out for losses in the previous 4 years combined. These numbers do not include the Arctic blast the lower 48 experienced in early 2019. High water continuing to be a problem along the Arkansas River, but it's much better than it was just a couple of weeks ago. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers providing an update on Facebook at the Dardanelle Lock and Dam in Arkansas. They say about 160,000 cubic feet per second of water is passing through the dam. Normal is between 60 and 70 this time of year. They say they're working hard to get commerce moving up and down the river at that point again. But could anything have been done to reduce the effects of the water downstream? The Corps addressing that issue in a Facebook video.
These are navigation structures, not flood control structures. Now, I did find an interesting suggestion that said maybe we should have reduced the amount of water in Lake Dardanelle before this event as we saw it coming. Well, first, that's not really something that's possible, but I had my modelers take a look at that, and it turns out that anything that we could have done differently had we tried would have made the effects downstream far worse.
As those floodwaters continue to head south, the Mississippi River remains at flood levels with no clear indication of when those levels will begin to fall, and it's beginning to affect sea life. So many months of fresh water flooding in is killing oysters and pushing crab, shrimp, and finfish out of bays, marshes, and into saltier waters. It's a bad year for many people who make their living from the water in South Louisiana and Mississippi. Some areas already have 100% oyster mortality, and the coastal average of oyster production this time of year is down overall by 80%.
We don't have a live oyster in here, not one. And this was a 100 sack a day spot. See these rock oysters, we've got rocks planted in here. It's no more good. This is what fresh water does us.
Mississippi's governor has asked the federal government for a fisheries disaster declaration. Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries said it is following suit. Some interesting things are growing, you just have to see. Today's crop comments with meteorologist Mike Hoffman. Mike?
Clinton, there's cotton growing in Indiana. Now, it's a very small crop, and this one is a bit different than what you might think. This photo is shared on Twitter by AgriTalk's own Ashley Davenport, if you follow Ashley on Twitter. She's been keeping people updated on some cotton she is growing in a pot inside her northern Indiana home. Ashley joking that her cotton is taller than the corn crop in that part of the state right now. Yeah, I think she's right about that. At least she has some nice looking leaves there. And taking a look at the wind speed forecast, we do have a system moving through the Ohio Valley, southwestern Great Lakes. It'll turn a little bit breezier as we head through the afternoon, but the windiest area is going to be near Texarkana and also the northern Rockies. Heading into tomorrow morning, we'll see not a whole lot of wind, a little bit in parts of the southeast, and then we'll pick things up from the Carolinas into the eastern Ohio Valley and most of the west from the central Rockies right on back into California. I'll have more on your forecast coming up. Now here are some hometown temps.
Introducing Farm Journal TV, on demand 24/7. AgDay, Machinery Pete TV. U.S. Farm Report on your phone and tablet. Download the Farm Journal TV mobile app today.
Energy and equities in the spotlight right now. We explore what could be their future coming up, and later an effort to keep things buzzing by doing a little research on honeybees. Still ahead on AgDay.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
Soybeans open higher and push to the highest level since March before heading back down. Here's an update now from the CME.
Sunday night, we were flying up to new recent highs in corn, soybeans, wheat, and then we came crashing back down yesterday during the day, and we followed through to the downside on that in the overnight session Monday night into Tuesday morning into this morning. For the most part, weather looks the same to me as it has for the last few days, and that is concerning for the next 2 weeks. And then beyond that, we have a warmer, drier period, but that would be coming too late to really get aggressive planting, especially for corn, but probably even for soybeans at that point. So we still have this problem that we've been struggling with all planting season. That hasn't changed. The one thing that I will say is that from a technical perspective, we had a target in December corn at 373. We tagged it with Sunday night's high. We weren't able to get over it. We came down and closed that gap, so that causes some technical selling. We are seeing a bit of that. And then soybeans ran into very big weekly resistance levels too. So technicals are coming into play right now. Fundamentals haven't changed. I still see new highs coming for at least corn and soybeans. We'll see about the wheat. This is Ted Seifert of Zaner Ag Hedge coming to you from the CME floor. Happy Tuesday, everybody.
We're joined now by Naomi Bloom with Stuart Peterson. And Naomi, let's talk about some of the other markets and kind of the other factors influencing farming right now, from energy to the dollar and some of our other equities that we're watching. What do you see out there on the horizon?
I think we're at a point where we're going to see some interesting price moves in the weeks ahead. Looking at the US dollar, we're actually seeing it start to maybe flip over and think about trending a little bit lower.
Okay.
That'd be great. That's really good for our export markets, so then that would be quite helpful in the bigger picture. But then with the volatility in the global place that's starting to heat up in the Middle East, makes me wonder if people will flock to the dollar as a safe haven, or if we see other global currencies start to come to life. What I'm really thinking about, though, with the energy complex is that crude oil, heating oil, prices have had a recovery lower recently. I think that's a really good opportunity to book any diesel costs that you would need for harvest.
Okay.
Because if the tensions in the Middle East flare up, that market price might whoosh higher as we go forward. The other thing I'm really thinking about is the LP costs. With this late planted crop, unless Mother Nature is super kind to us from here on out, we're going to have expensive drying costs at the end of the year.
Okay.
So if you can do anything to book your LP needs, I think do it. Get it booked and locked in now, because if you look at some historical charts, it's cheap. It's really cheap right now. So book that in there, because a late harvest usually doesn't mean that the drying is going to be perfect and you're going to have to spend a little bit more.
All right, so there's multiple things out there then that we're watching kind of that could play into, you know, kind of the way we operate, and maybe some long-term planning here.
Yeah.
And drying costs definitely may be one of those, given where we're at on planning. Thank you so much. We'll be back with more Ag Day coming up here in just a minute.
To discuss marketing strategies, call 800-334-9779 or visit stuartpeterson.com. Ag Day, brought to you by new Delaro fungicide for corn and soybeans. Achieve personal best yields.
Welcome back to Ag Day. Your meteorologist Mike Hoffman looking at the weather map. And Mike, we've got this front just kind of draped across the middle of the country here, just hanging out.
And it's continuing to cause some issues, obviously. Lots of areas getting way too much rain, as we've seen a lot this spring and early summer. We also have a system in the northeastern portions of the Gulf of Mexico. Not going to be a tropical storm or anything, but it is going to cause some rain over the next 36 hours as it passes across the peninsula of Florida. And one more system just north of Montana with a cold front draped through the northeastern Rockies. That'll produce some showers and thunderstorms, at least scattered, in North and South Dakota. Heading into this afternoon, you can see areas of thunderstorms: Missouri, eastern Iowa, across Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, western Kentucky, down into Arkansas. Heading through the nighttime hours tonight, the low in the Gulf is now into the Atlantic. It's moving away. So basically that rain is gone, and showers and thunderstorms, the lower lakes all the way down into the Ohio Valley, and then just hit and miss, kind of those typical afternoon variety thunderstorms in the southeast, although sometimes it does occur in the morning like our model is showing, but heading into this afternoon, and we'll see a few more of those kind of pop up and develop. But the main system moving through West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and basically the Appalachian mountain areas Continuing to move east, showers and thunderstorms with the northern plains front across Minnesota and some of the surrounding states, and then the hit and miss variety afternoon stuff in the west. There's the past 24 hours precipitation estimates. You can see over the next 36, we will continue to add some from the Mississippi Valley to the East Coast. Kind of hit and miss, except for near that area of low pressure. And then you can see some areas still across the plain states as well. Temperatures this afternoon finally heating up. Texas, southern Mississippi Valley into the 90s. Still 60s and 70s, though, especially where it's raining across the Great Lakes for high temperatures. Low temperatures tonight then going to stay in the 50s and 60s, most of the northern half of the country. And you can see a little bit muggier across the southeast, and that's going to continue through tomorrow afternoon. Might even see some triple digits in South Texas there tomorrow afternoon, but it's still on the cool side for this time of the year across the Great Lakes. Taking a look at the jet stream, you can see it's kind of zonal. We do have that weak system moving through along that front. That moves east. We get a ridge building into the Great Lakes in the east for a few days there, which might heat it up, and then we go back to zonal for a while with a trough developing in the western portions of the country by the middle of next week. That's a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. We head to Salt Lake City, Utah. First of all, lots of sunshine and warm today, high up to 85. Kansas City, Missouri, cloudy and mild with rain showers at times, especially in the morning, high 75. Warm and muggy in Columbia, South Carolina, maybe a storm, high 91.
Coming up, we check in on the watermelon harvest in Georgia and why U.S. apples are now facing steep tariffs in India. Next. India has now imposed a 20% retaliatory tariff on U.S. apples, walnuts, almonds, and 25 other goods. India imposed the tariffs in response to President Trump's tariffs on imported Indian steel and aluminum put in place last year. U.S. apple shipments to India face a base tariff of 50%. The retaliatory tariff will increase the total to 70%. Now, Washington state exported more than 8 million bushels to India last year. That makes India the second most important customer of Washington apples. But this season, shipments to India are off about 66% compared to a year ago. There's some good news about this year's watermelon crop in Georgia. The Georgia Watermelon Association reports overall acreage is down, but yields and quality are up. Officials say the weather for this year's growing season has been good so far, saying it is getting hot quickly, and that is watermelon weather. Georgia produces watermelons on more than 18,000 acres, and the first watermelons started arriving in stores last week. Coming up, protecting honeybees, a look inside important research that's helping keep things buzzing. Next in the country.
In the Country is powered by Kawasaki. Let the good times roll.
Scientists with USDA are studying ways to keep honeybees stress-free and healthy. These pollinators are important to American agriculture and our nation's food crops. USDA's Patrick O'Leary reports from Maryland.
Honeybees contribute as much as $17 billion annually to the U.S. economy by providing pollination services to dozens of fruit and vegetable crops. This typically starts on the West Coast.
Every year, commercial beekeepers transport their bees to California for almond pollination. Afterwards, the honeybee colonies can be transported to other locations in the U.S. to pollinate different crops.
So keeping bee colonies healthy is a priority for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service. This ARS lab in Beltsville, Maryland, is literally buzzing with activity.
For bee researchers, one of the starting points in understanding honeybee health and the stresses that they're exposed to is to conduct very controlled laboratory cage studies where honeybees are exposed to these different stressors.
The scientists study honeybee nutrition as well as other threats to bee colony health.
Viruses, pests, and disease can work in combination to affect colony health. And so reducing those impacts can improve colony health and reduce colony collapse incidents.
ARS scientists are looking to the emerging science of genomics as part of an integrated bee health strategy.
Methodologies, including genomics, can play a large role in helping us to decipher in great detail the effects of stress on honeybees and alleviate the negative effects of these stressors on honeybees.
In addition to agriculture, honeybees and other pollinators contribute greatly to healthy ecosystems and biodiversity around the world. In Beltsville, Maryland, for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I'm Pat O'Leary.
Thanks, Patrick, and that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. It's been part of your day with us. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.